The other day, my son had another first. He was interviewing for a large merchandising company locally, and it was a video interview. This episode's going to be about winning with video interviews. There's plenty of do's and don'ts. If you want to know if my son had a winning interview and was awarded the job, you'll have to stay tuned. You're listening to the Career Growth Made Easy podcast, and I'm your host, Craig Ansell. We're rolling into episode 56, Winning with Video Interviews. But first, before we start the episode content, I want to take a moment to recognize a longtime listener, someone that's been with us from episode 1. Sean, thank you so much for your continued social media comments, occasional emails, and feedback, helping us make the show better. Speaking about that, I'd really appreciate it if you would take the time to pause this episode and leave a social media comment at Craig Ansell. That's CraigAncel. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, or you can email me directly, craig@craigansell.com. I really do appreciate your feedback and comments, and when we can put an episode together to help you for something that you're going through with your personal or professional career growth, we'd be honored to do so. Now, what you've been waiting for, let's dive deep into winning with interviews. Back to my son's story. His name is Nicholas, by the way. He had a multi-part interview. It started out with him applying online, being accepted, and receiving an email telling him that there would be some questions and an essay online. After he completed that content, he was promoted to the next round of interviewing. That was where he would do a computer video recorded interview, but it was all automated. No one was involved except him. He had asked if I'd been through it, and some of you other listeners are asking the same thing now. It seems like it's starting to become something rather popular. My guess is that while we continue to evolve technologically in society, we're also limited with resources. Why would you need to spend the time interviewing someone at certain hours of the day, potentially during business rush hours, when you could make the most profit and money for your business and be the most effective at your job? Why not record the interviews and, if at all possible, automate them so you don't need someone on the business side proctoring them and processing them? This is what has happened. Things have become automated to the point now where you click a link, you run some tests to make sure your audio and video connection is working, which we'll talk about, and then you follow a recorded sequence of questions and answers. I wonder where we'll go next with interviewing. If you pass that round of interviews, an in-person interview is likely, or potentially a phone follow-up interview to confirm a few points. So, regarding preparing so that you can win with video interviews, it's all a matter of how much time and effort you want to put forth. I would set up a computer, likely a laptop, if not a computer with a webcam and a good microphone, and I would place it in the exact location that you intend to perform the video interview. You want to minimize any and all distractions. Go into that room at the time of day you plan to do the interview and sit and listen quietly. What noises do you observe? Are there any recurring sounds? Any creaking doors or ceiling fans or anything like that that could be a distraction to you during the interview and cause you to become nervous or unfocused? Or if you record a trial session with your audio-video setup, play it back and listen. Do you hear anything that would bother you that's a recurring noise or some type of irritating sound? These are great tips because the focus for the interview is, of course, on you. We don't want distractions for yourself or for the people that are going to be looking at your interview recording. So that's critical. Your setup, your background, and when I say that, I mean consider the audio background, the background noise, as well as your video background. What's behind you when you're going to be shooting this video recording? Some software, if you have used virtual meeting software such as Zoom or Google Meet, and I think Skype and some others are out there, allow you to blur your background. But don't take that for granted, because you may be using the company's custom software, or it may just be a straight up click to record with no options. So I would definitely recommend to have a clear and controlled background. You don't want something there that's going to cause questions about your interview or a distraction while someone's listening or watching to your playback. Next, you need to get comfortable with the fact that you're going to be clicking on a start link. There's going to be probably a countdown timer, which could be stressful. And then you're going to see questions pop up on the screen. It'll likely be distracting that you're going to want to look down at your laptop or computer screen to read the question. Then remember, there's no one else there with you, no one else prompting you to respond. You're going to need to compose yourself and respond to those questions. By the way, try not to talk into the computer screen or monitor. Try to talk focusing and looking at the camera. That's going to be a little challenging. Now, thankfully, the people on the other end know this is going to be challenging. It's a relatively new style, doing video recorded interviews without having a person to prompt you along. So there is a little bit of forgiveness there. However, anything you can do with your preparation to make you shine will help you win with the video interview. So now that we've talked about your audio background, background noise, your video background, what's going to be behind you when you present and record, next you're going to have to get comfortable with looking at the screen, as I mentioned, reading the questions, composing your thoughts, and responding. Now, I'm going to give you a few tips as well. First, the questions will likely have time limits. You'll be allotted 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes to respond. But, and this is a big but, you don't have to use all the time allotted. The more concisely and the more quickly that you can respond and get your point across, it's going to make you shine and likely outweigh your interview against the others. Think about it. Put yourself in the interviewer's position. You have to go through these audio and video recorded interviews, probably off hours, and pick the best candidate that you want to advance to the next round. Would you rather have someone that speaks clearly, concisely, and keeps your attention with short, focused phrases and sentences, or someone that rambles on trying to use up the full amount of time? I think we all know the answer to that one. So now, we've talked about your background, we've talked about looking at the computer screen, reading the question, pausing, and responding. And responding in a timely manner, right? Next, if you find yourself during the interview that you are rambling, just stop. It might feel awkward that you want to finish the sentence or the phrase, but honestly, I would recommend you just stop. It shows a significant amount of self-control that you're able to stop yourself and recompose. Next, if you answer a question really well, but then start to talk about the capabilities or skill sets you don't yet have, or, well, I'm really good with this software, but I don't know this process or this, stop. It's okay to know that you have limitations, and it might even be more daunting or induce anxiety or stress because the fact that you know you're being recorded and it can't be unrecorded. It can't be unsaid. But I'll tell you something that I just had a discussion with one of my other students on this same topic. She's going to be interviewing at a Fortune 100 company. One of the tips that I gave her was the same thing that I'm sharing with you. If you get to a point where you've answered solidly, but then do share a little bit of, well, I'm learning this, or I'm not certain about that process or that software, just stop. Do the 3P process that I talked about in an earlier episode. I think it was episode 51, and it was called Powerfully Placed Pauses. Pauses allow you to focus and reconnect with your content, and they're a good way to break anxiety or stress if you feel yourself getting ramped up emotionally. If you find yourself saying something that you could have said better and it's bothering you in your head, even though you're on to the next sentence, but you realize what you said prior wasn't the best statement, you know what? That's okay too. It's not going to make a difference if it's video recorded or you had a room full of people interviewing you. Again, it can't be unsaid, but what you can do is course correct. I'd like to rephrase my prior sentence. I'd like to rephrase how I just responded. I'd like to clarify my prior answer and shed a little bit more light on the topic. I'd like to expand on what I just said to make sure there's clarity. I gave you a number of examples there using different words just to let you know that yes, it's okay to make mistakes. We're all human. I make them all the time. However, I do have the fortune to stop, rewind, and re-record. I know in an interview, in person, or being video recorded, you won't have that fortune. That's why I gave you some phrases earlier to help you. And hopefully, just hearing this podcast, whether you're doing an interview in the near future or not, whether it's in person or with video, it gives you a little bit more comfort, a little bit more confidence, and a little bit more peace, potentially reducing your anxiety, knowing that interviews do not have to be perfect. In fact, if it is perfect or appears perfect, I've heard comments, it looked scripted, it looks like the interviewee over-prepared, the interviewee was almost robotic with their answers. You don't want to get that kind of feedback, because if you do, you likely won't get to the next step or next round of the interview. Now, there's quite a bit more we need to cover, and I'm going to do that for you so that you know how to win with video interviews. Also, I have some past podcasts that talk specifically about interviewing, as well as tips further in detail on checking your tech. You want to rule out as many things as you can so that you can focus on having a strong, powerful, winning interview. So let's start to recap and make sure that I hit a lot of the points that I was intending. You might feel awkward or funny recording, and that's okay. Honestly, many people do. When I first started this podcast, it's just audio only, a big microphone and a pop filter sitting in front of a couple monitors. It felt funny talking to myself. That's something I had to get used to and overcome as well. I would recommend that you use headphones or a head-based microphone so that the recording session is clear and they hear your voice strongly. It's important to keep a consistent distance between your mouth and the microphone. You could also use a desk-based microphone if you have it. Just keep that in mind and make sure that you have good body posture if you do that, because a desk-based microphone might actually have you hunched over or leaning to one side or the other to talk into it to get the proper audio level. It would just be easiest if you had headphones with a nice microphone attached. Now, with today's technology, some people might opt to use a cell phone. It's really recommended against because it can be challenging and sometimes provide lower audio quality. However, if that's all you have, it's understandable and you have to go with the resources that you have. So, in that case, make sure that the camera phone is mounted on something sturdy, it won't shake or vibrate during the interview, and that you do some test runs with it to make sure you have good video quality as far as lighting and background, and that your audio is clear. Dress to impress. Even though it's a video interview, you should do that. I strongly recommend it. You want to impress your potential future hiring manager. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll recap. Make sure you have a well-lit area and possibly a good backlight. Oh, and by the way, about distractions, I forgot to mention people and pets. Try to do this in an environment that you can control so that you have the focus on you. I mentioned that I have some other episodes on interviewing. I'll put links in the show notes for those. One particular episode that comes to mind that would complement this is episode 48, and it was part of my Ultimate Career Growth Performance series, and that was called Interviews. You should check that out. Then finally, let's talk about logistics, okay? The process behind the video interview. You'll likely have the opportunity to record and practice your audio and video session before going into the actual recorded interview. It's recommended that you follow that process if it's available and not jump directly into recording the video interview, because you might find there's some bugs or some issues with lighting or audio that you might like to correct. Also, seating posture is critical. Try to sit upright and be confident. Try not to slouch, and try not to lose focus because you're being recorded by a camera and you don't see anyone on the other end. It's going to be hard to keep up that energy, I know. What you could do is put a picture of a friend, a family member, or maybe a pet near your camera's lens so that you can look at it and almost feel like you're talking to that person, and maybe that'll just keep you positive and keep up the inspiration during the interview. And once you enter the interview, remember, questions are going to pop up, and you'll have time before you record your response. You can always take notes, just like you're in a real interview. I think that's a good thing. And if you need to say on the interview, I'm just taking a few notes, they'll figure it out. But if it makes you feel better, say it. It's truthful. And again, you'll have time limits likely on your questions, but not all the time limits will be the same. Some will be short answer, 30 seconds, a minute, some several minutes long, potentially 2, 3, 4, 5. Doesn't mean you have to use all the time allotted. Try to go through in your mind and envision what questions they might ask you, and prepare responses. Name a difficult time that you had at another job. Tell us how you handled working with a difficult employee. Tell us how you handled working with a difficult or irate customer. You know, there's just so many questions that could be asked and so much to prepare for. It's hard to know when enough is enough and when you're ready. But I assure you, no matter what amount of effort you put forth preparing for your next video interview, you'll do a great job, because every minute you spend is well worth it. I mentioned episode 48 earlier, and I strongly suggest you go back. I just took a quick look at the show notes, and I actually have some links in there, including a study from Glassdoor, which talks about the top 50 questions you could likely be asked during an interview. I think it's really valuable because it can shed some light on questions we weren't expecting and find ways to answer them, or at least confidently talk about them should they come up during your interview. The biggest thing, you don't want to look like a deer in the headlights, stumble, stutter, or just stare into the camera, not knowing what to say. By the way, I will recap all these great tips and tricks on my free download at our website, and I'll actually put some additional tips in there that I haven't discussed today. So make sure you go to my website, craigansell.com, and you look for the resources tab. Also, there'll be links in the show notes that you can click on to download the freebie associated with this podcast. Thanks for sticking in there. I pray that you have successful video interviews going forward. And if you have any questions or different experiences that come up, please feel free to drop us a note at Craig Ansell, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, or directly to me at email, craig@craigansell.com. Wishing you peace and success in your personal and professional career growth journey. We'll talk next week. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channel. New episodes every Monday. In the meantime, why don't you follow us on social media at Craig Ansell on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. To book a coaching appointment, download our free guides, or join our email list, check out the links in the description below.